The Galactic Dominion had ruled over the Orion Arm for over 1,000 years. Their fleets of sleek, silver warships moved through the void like reapers, harvesting planets and civilizations that dared to resist. No species had ever stood against them for long. Those who tried were crushed, their homeworlds reduced to ash, their names erased from history. It was an unbreakable truth. The Dominion always won. That truth shattered the day humanity arrived. The war had raged for decades between the Dominion and the Coalition of Free Worlds, a fragile alliance of lesser species struggling to push back against their oppressors. They fought bravely, but without hope. Every battle was a slow, agonizing defeat. The Dominion had more ships, better weapons, and a will forged through centuries of absolute control. The Coalition had courage, but courage alone could not hold the line. Then, without warning, a new signal entered the battlefield. It was an unknown vessel, emerging from the dark of uncharted space like a phantom. Every Dominion sensor, every scanner, every ship picked up the presence of something unthinkable. A single warship. But it wasn't like any ship they had ever seen. It was massive, brutal in its design, built for war, not elegance. Its thick, armored hull was scarred from battles fought elsewhere, its weapons primed with a confidence that defied all logic. The hull bore an unfamiliar insignia, a blue sphere crossed by white lines, and across the metal in bold, defiant letters was a name that sent a ripple of unease through the Dominion's ranks. UES Retribution. The Dominion fleet, confident as ever, sent a warning. An offer of surrender. An ultimatum. The newcomers did not reply. Instead, the warship moved. The Dominion's battlecruisers adjusted formation, preparing for what they assumed would be a desperate and suicidal charge. But the humans didn't charge. They didn't evade. They simply fired. A single volley of kinetic slugs left the Retribution's forward railguns, and a Dominion battleship, one of their strongest, ceased to exist. Shields, armor, hull, all gone in an instant. The ship didn't explode. It was torn apart, shattered into pieces by sheer force. The Dominion officers, so used to watching enemies struggle helplessly against their superior firepower, stared in stunned disbelief. This was impossible. No weapon should be capable of doing this. The Coalition forces, battered and outgunned, watched in equal disbelief. But their disbelief turned to hope as the Retribution fired again. And again. Each shot was death. Each blast was final. The Dominion fleet panicked. Orders were shouted. Formations crumbled. They had never faced an enemy like this. An enemy that did not fear them, did not hesitate, did not even acknowledge their supposed superiority. The humans had come not to fight a desperate war, but to win. Across the Coalition fleet, transmissions burst to life. Who are you?" a desperate Coalition admiral asked. A response came, cold and certain. "We are humanity." And with those words, the balance of power in the galaxy shifted forever. The Dominion had ruled for 1,000 years. But against the Retribution, against the species that had survived its own wars, its own self-destruction, and still risen stronger. The Dominion had finally met an enemy it could not conquer. The Dominion fleet, once an unbreakable wall of conquest, had never known true fear. Their empire had crushed 1,000 civilizations, and no species had ever inflicted real losses upon them. Their war doctrine was simple: overwhelm, dominate, and erase. But as the UES Retribution moved through the battlefield, turning their mightiest warships into wreckage, a terrifying realization spread among the Dominion commanders. They were not fighting desperate rebels or scattered resistance forces anymore. They were fighting something far worse. They were fighting humans. Panic spread through the Dominion fleet like wildfire. The Retribution was unlike anything they had ever encountered. It did not use energy weapons like their ships. It did not rely on shields or plasma-based cannons. No, this warship was something else entirely. A predator built for destruction. Every shot it fired was lethal. Dominion battleships, each the size of floating cities, were torn apart in seconds. The Retribution's railguns fired with terrifying precision, sending hypersonic slugs through entire formations of enemy ships. Their vaunted energy shields, designed to withstand plasma bombardments and laser barrages, were useless against the sheer brute force of mass-driven projectiles. The Dominion's High Admiral, commanding the battle from the bridge of his flagship Glorious Ascendancy, could barely comprehend what was happening. His long fingers gripped the edges of his console, his reptilian eyes darting between the rapidly depleting fleet readouts. Entire squadrons were vanishing from the sensors in real time. Impossible, he muttered under his breath. The communications officers were already screaming reports of lost ships, of panicked officers requesting retreat orders. The Dominion fleet had never been on the receiving end of such overwhelming destruction. "Transmit an offer for surrender," the High Admiral snapped. "If they are rational, they will—" "They're firing again," a lieutenant screamed. The Retribution's spinal-mounted railgun charged. A soundless hum spread through the vacuum of space as the ship adjusted its aim, targeting the Glorious Ascendancy itself. The High Admiral barely had time to react before the slug was fired. Unlike Dominion weapons, which relied on energy and plasma, this was a solid projectile. A 20-meter-long tungsten rod accelerated to near-light speed. It struck the Glorious Ascendancy at its core, and punched straight through. For a brief, terrible moment, there was silence. Then, the Dominion's flagship began to split apart. The kinetic force of the impact tore through the vessel, cracking it open like an egg. Fires burst from its innards as its artificial atmosphere vented violently into space. The ship's engines flickered, sputtered, then exploded in a blinding flash. The High Admiral did not even have time to scream. The Dominion fleet, once the terror of the galaxy, watched in horror as their flagship, the very symbol of their dominance, was obliterated in a single shot. That was the moment their discipline shattered. Ships broke formation. Some turned and fled, jumping into hyperspace without waiting for orders. Others tried to fight, firing wildly at the Retribution, but their weapons barely scratched its armor. And then, the humans spoke again. "This is your only warning. Surrender or be erased." It wasn't a plea. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a fact. The Dominion had never encountered an enemy like this. The humans did not fight for survival. They did not fight for revenge. They fought for total victory. And as the remains of the Dominion fleet scattered into the darkness, one truth became clear. The age of Dominion rule was over. The age of humanity had begun. The remnants of the Dominion fleet scattered in every direction, their sleek warships vanishing into hyperspace like frightened prey, fleeing a relentless predator. On board the UES Retribution, Captain Elias Graves watched the enemy retreat in silence. The bridge was quiet, save for the hum of machinery and the faint murmurs of his crew monitoring the battlefield. The Dominion, once the unquestioned rulers of this part of the galaxy, had been broken in a single engagement. A communications officer turned from her console. "Captain, incoming transmission from the Coalition flagship." Graves nodded. "Put it through." The main screen flickered to life, revealing the haggard yet awestruck face of Admiral Varric, the leader of the Coalition forces. Varric was an older Zilari, a species of avian-like beings who had fought against the Dominion for decades. His feathers, usually a bright emerald, were dulled with age and the weight of war. But now, for the first time in years, there was something new in his sharp eyes. Hope. Human, Varric said, his voice careful. You saved us. Graves leaned forward in his chair, his expression unreadable. We came because we heard your distress calls. Your war is our war now. Varric hesitated. Why? Why would you fight for us? We had no knowledge of your people, no alliance, no history. The human captain exhaled slowly, as if considering his words. Then he spoke with the weight of a species that had endured centuries of war, of suffering, of triumph. The Dominion made a mistake, Graves said. They thought they ruled this part of the galaxy unchallenged. They believed they were invincible, that no one could stand against them. He paused, his eyes cold. They were wrong. Varric glanced at the wreckage littering the battlefield, once mighty Dominion warships reduced to nothing but drifting debris. You could change everything. With technology like yours, with warships like the Retribution, the Dominion wouldn't stand a chance. Graves gave a slight nod. That's the idea. For a long moment, Varric simply stared at the screen, his feathers ruffling with emotion. Then, his beak curled into something resembling a smile. I never thought I'd live to see the Dominion run in fear. Graves leaned back in his chair. Get used to it. The bridge crew of the Retribution waited in silence. Then, from the Coalition fleet, a signal was transmitted, one that carried across the battlefield, reaching every surviving vessel still listening. A declaration. The war was no longer a struggle for survival. It was an offensive, the beginning of humanity's conquest. The news of the battle spread like wildfire across the stars. The Dominion, once unchallenged, had suffered defeat, and not just a minor setback, but a catastrophic loss that sent shockwaves through the galaxy. For the first time in 1,000 years, their enemies had not been crushed. They had fought back, and they had won. In the war-torn sectors of the Coalition, whispers became shouts, despair turned into resolve. Entire fleets that had been on the verge of surrender now regrouped. Colonies that had been bracing for annihilation took up arms. The Dominion had always been seen as unstoppable. Now, they were vulnerable. And at the center of it all, a single name echoed across every communication channel, every war council, every desperate resistance cell. Humanity. On board the UES Retribution, Captain Elias Graves stood in the strategy room with Admiral Varric and the other coalition leaders. A massive holographic display showed the star maps of the known galaxy. The Dominion's territories stretched across them like an unbreakable iron grip. But now there was a crack. The Dominion won't sit still after this, Varric said, his talons tapping against the table. They'll retaliate, and when they do, they'll come with everything they have. They always escalate, chimed in another coalition commander, a reptilian Garshok general. They will want to make an example of us. Graves crossed his arms. Let them try. Varric gave him a sharp look. You don't understand the scale of what we're dealing with, human. You might have defeated one fleet, but the Dominion controls thousands of warships. Entire sectors are devoted to nothing but ship production. You can't win by brute force alone. Graves studied the map for a moment, then smiled. Who said anything about brute force? The room fell silent. Graves tapped on the holographic display, zooming into the Dominion's vast empire. He pointed to a specific system, one deep within enemy space. The Dominion wins because they control supply lines. They win because they dictate the terms of every battle. He looked up at the coalition leaders. But what if we don't fight by their rules? The reptilian general narrowed his yellow eyes. What are you suggesting? A slow grin spread across Graves' face. We take the war to them. Varric's feathers bristled. You're proposing a counteroffensive? That's insanity. We barely survived this battle. We don't have the numbers. We don't need numbers. Graves interrupted. "We just need the right targets." He gestured to a few key points on the map: shipyards, resource depots, communication hubs. The vital arteries that kept the Dominion's massive war machine running. "The Dominion has spent centuries fighting species that play by their rules," Graves said. "They expect resistance to fight defensively, to hold the line, to retreat when overwhelmed. But humans? We don't fight like that." His voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. "We hit them where it hurts. We cut them off. We make them bleed." The room was silent for a long moment. Then Varric let out a low chuckle. "You're insane." Graves smirked. "Probably." The reptilian general studied the display, then exhaled through his nostrils. "It's risky, it's reckless, and it might actually work." One by one, the coalition leaders nodded in agreement. Hope flickered in their expressions. Hope and something else. Ruthlessness. For the first time in this war, they weren't just trying to survive. They were preparing to win. The meeting ended with one simple declaration. A transmission that would be sent across every occupied world, every hidden resistance cell, every broken fleet still waiting in the shadows. A message that would shake the very foundation of the galaxy. The war has changed. Humanity has arrived, and the Dominion will fall. The Dominion's High Council convened in the heart of their empire, deep within the towering citadel on Prime World. The chamber was massive, its walls adorned with the relics of past conquests. Holographic banners displayed images of their countless victories. Worlds burned, fleets shattered, civilizations erased. Yet now, for the first time in centuries, those gathered at the highest seats of power were not here to gloat. They were here because of fear. At the head of the chamber, Supreme Chancellor Orvax rose from his throne-like chair, his deep golden scales shimmering under the dim light. His slitted eyes scanned the room, taking in the expressions of his fellow rulers: unease, confusion, and in some, outright panic. "This is unacceptable," Orvax growled, his voice echoing through the chamber. "An unknown species annihilates one of our fleets, destroys our High Admiral, and scatters our forces like vermin, and none of you have answers." A Dominion War Minister, his face lined with the ridges of age and experience, cleared his throat. "Chancellor, we are still gathering intelligence. These humans appeared from nowhere. Their technology is crude, yet somehow devastatingly effective. Their warship, the Retribution, does not follow conventional designs." "Then study it!" Orvax slammed his clawed hand against the table. "Dissect their tactics. We do not lose battles. We do not lose wars." A more cautious voice, one of the Empire's intelligence heads, spoke next. "Chancellor, we must consider the implications. If this single ship inflicted such damage, it is possible the humans have more. We have no records of them in our archives, no known colonies, no history of diplomatic contact." He paused. "And yet, they fight with the precision of a species born for war." Orvax exhaled slowly. "Then we must erase them before they spread." A murmur of agreement rippled through the chamber. The Dominion did not tolerate challengers. They would not allow a new power to rise and threaten their control. Orvax turned to his fleet commander. "Mobilize the Grand Armada. Not just a detachment, everything. If these humans want war, we will bring them extinction." Far from the Dominion's seat of power, in a darkened war room aboard the UES Retribution, Captain Elias Graves and the coalition leaders studied their next moves. The battle had been won, but the real war was just beginning. "You know they're coming for us," Admiral Varric said. "The Dominion does not take humiliation lightly. They will bring everything to our doorstep." Graves nodded. "That's exactly what we want." Varric tilted his head, his feathers twitching in confusion. "You want to fight their entire armada?" "No," Graves said. "I want them to think we're going to fight their armada." He brought up the holographic map of Dominion space, highlighting key supply lines and communication hubs. They're expecting us to defend, but we won't. We'll attack where they least expect it. We'll cut their supply lines, disrupt their movements, make their empire bleed. The reptilian Garshok general grinned, his sharp teeth glinting under the dim light. Guerrilla warfare on a galactic scale. Graves smirked. Exactly. Varric exhaled. And what happens when the Dominion realizes what we're doing? When they send their entire armada against us? Graves's expression darkened. Then we show them what happens when you push humanity too far. The war had changed. The Dominion believed itself invincible, but it had never faced an enemy like humanity, and soon the galaxy would learn the cost of underestimating Earth's fury. Across the stars, the Dominion's vast war machine began to move. Fleets that had once patrolled their borders in casual arrogance were now being recalled and rearmed. Warships the size of cities emerged from hidden shipyards, their hulls glistening with fresh armor. Battlecruisers, dreadnoughts, and entire planet-cracking siege fleets gathered in formation. For the first time in 1,000 years, the Dominion was preparing for a total war. And their target? Humanity. But where was humanity? That question haunted the Dominion's admirals as they swept across the battlefield. They expected a desperate coalition force to dig in, to hold defensive lines, to cower behind shields. That was what every species had done before. But there were no lines, no fortifications. Instead, there were whispers. A Dominion fuel depot in the Zevran sector was reduced to slag, its reactors sabotaged before the fleet could even arrive. A shipyard responsible for churning out warships for the Dominion's Grand Armada was destroyed overnight, its entire orbital structure turned into a spinning field of debris. A communication relay deep within Dominion space went silent, its technicians found dead, its encryption codes stolen. It was death by 1,000 cuts, attacks from the shadows, strikes that crippled the spine of the Empire. And at the heart of it all, one name echoed through Dominion space like a nightmare: the UES Retribution. On board the warship, Captain Elias Graves sat at the center of his bridge, his expression unreadable. The holographic displays before him showed reports of the chaos they had sown. The Dominion was flailing. They were chasing ghosts. It was working. "They're pulling ships away from the front lines," Varric said, scanning the reports. "Their admirals are confused. They don't know where to commit their forces." Graves nodded. "They're used to fighting enemies who play by their rules. We don't." He turned to his officers. "Prepare the next strike." "Target?" his weapons officer asked. Graves's eyes narrowed. "Their home world." The bridge fell silent. Even Varric, hardened by decades of war, twitched his feathers in shock. "You can't be serious." Graves folded his arms. "Why not?" Varric scoffed. "Because it's suicide. Primeworld is the most heavily fortified planet in the galaxy. Their entire fleet will be there. Their defenses are meant to stop an invasion," Graves interrupted. "We're not invading." The coalition leaders stared at him. "What are we doing then?" the reptilian general asked. Graves's expression turned cold. "We're sending a message. Deep within Dominion space, Primeworld, the beating heart of the Empire, shimmered beneath its protective fleet. For centuries, no enemy had dared to approach its orbit. That changed in an instant. From the void, a single human warship emerged, UES Retribution. It did not hail. It did not ask for peace. It fired. A single kinetic round was launched, not at military targets, not at fortresses, but at the Imperial Palace itself. The projectile struck the outer walls, carving a deep scar across the very symbol of Dominion rule. The city below trembled, not from destruction, No civilians were harmed, but from shock. Then, as quickly as it had arrived, the retribution vanished into hyperspace. No demands, no warnings, just a message, carved into the Dominion's very core. We can reach you. You are not safe. For the first time in history, the rulers of the Dominion felt fear. The Dominion's High Council stood in stunned silence. A single human warship had breached their defenses. It had reached Prime World, and worse, it hadn't come to destroy. It hadn't even attempted a serious attack. It had sent a message, a cold, calculated warning. We can reach you. You are not safe. Supreme Chancellor Orvax sat at the head of the chamber, his golden scales trembling with barely contained rage. His claws dug into the armrests of his throne as his advisors and admirals argued in panic. "This is an outrage," a war minister shouted. "Our fleets were stationed at Prime World. Where were our defenses?" "Their ship was too fast," an admiral growled. "It arrived and disappeared before we could react. This is not conventional warfare. This is terrorism." "Terrorism!" Orvax spat, his slit-pupiled eyes burning with fury. This is humiliation." The silence that followed was chilling. Every Dominion world had watched as their untouchable capital had been violated. The greatest empire in the galaxy had been mocked, its rulers desecrated, and they could do nothing. Orvax stood slowly, his golden robes flowing behind him as he stepped forward. "Enough," he said, his voice low and venomous. "We are the Dominion. We do not cower. We do not retreat." He turned his gaze to the assembled admirals. "Mobilize every available fleet. Every single one." His voice was a razor's edge. "I want every Dominion warship hunting these humans and their coalition pets. I want their colonies burned. I want their species erased from history." The admirals nodded, their faces grim. Orvax's eyes glowed with hatred. "They have given us their message." He bared his fangs. "Now, we will deliver ours." Across the galaxy, the hunt for humanity began. The Dominion's war machine roared to life, its vast fleets moving with a single goal: annihilation. Worlds were put under martial law. Every border, every sector was flooded with Dominion warships. Dozens of planets burned under their wrath as they sought retribution. Entire species were punished simply for sheltering the phantoms that had struck Prime World. But no matter how many fleets they sent, no matter how many planets they razed, they never found the retribution. Because the humans were already 3 steps ahead. On board the UES Retribution, Captain Elias Graves watched the reports in silence. The Dominion had done exactly what he wanted. "They're reacting," Varric muttered. "They're panicking." Graves nodded. "Which means they're making mistakes." He turned to his officers. "Begin Phase 2. His weapons officer hesitated. "Sir, if we move now, there's no going back." Graves's eyes were cold. "Good." The next strike wouldn't be a warning. The next strike would be the beginning of the end. The Dominion was a beast in its death throes, thrashing wildly across the galaxy in search of its unseen enemy. It was used to fighting wars of conquest, of overwhelming its foes with sheer numbers, of crushing resistance before it could even begin. But now it was fighting shadows. The Dominion's mighty fleets surged into one star system after another, but the enemy was never there. Instead, they found only ruins, shipyards sabotaged, fuel depots in flames, hyperspace relays left in pieces. Every battle they expected to win had already been lost before they even arrived. And each time, carved into the wreckage, scrawled onto shattered hulls, broadcast on Dominion emergency frequencies, was the same message: retribution is coming. Deep within the UES Retribution, Captain Elias Graves stood in the dim glow of the war table, his hands folded behind his back. The holographic display before him showed the enemy's movements: wild, undisciplined, desperate. "They're burning their own empire," Admiral Varric muttered, shaking his feathered head in disbelief. They're turning their fleets against their own people in search of us. Graves didn't blink. Good. The coalition generals, gathered around the table, studied the latest reports. The Dominion had pulled hundreds of warships away from their primary battlefronts, leaving garrisons weak, colonies exposed. The time has come, Graves said, zooming in on a specific point on the map. A single world, heavily fortified but now vulnerable. A world the Dominion could not afford to lose. Velronis Prime. The heart of the Dominion's war machine. The shipyard world. This planet builds a third of the Dominion's warships, Graves continued. If we take it out, they won't just be wounded, they'll be crippled. The reptilian Garshok general let out a slow, predatory grin. Then let's break them. Graves nodded. Prepare the fleet. We strike at dawn. Across the void, coalition and human warships assembled in secret, the largest combined fleet the Dominion had ever faced. Not a defensive force, not a desperate resistance, an offensive. For the first time in history, the Dominion was about to be invaded. Velronis Prime had never been attacked. Its defense platforms, orbital cannons, and planetary shields were said to be impenetrable. They had been built to stop an invasion. But humanity wasn't invading. They were here to destroy. The assault began with a single shot. The UES Retribution emerged from hyperspace in high orbit, moving faster than any Dominion warship could track. Its spinal-mounted railgun fired once. The projectile tore through Velronis Prime's primary defense station, turning it into a cloud of molten slag before the Dominion even realized what had happened. Before they could react, the full coalition fleet arrived. Hundreds of warships, fighters and bombers swarmed, capital ships unleashed hellfire, and ground forces launched in high-speed drop pods. Velronis Prime burned. The Dominion's shipyards, which had fed their war machine for centuries, collapsed in a single night. And as the world fell into ruin, the Dominion finally understood. This wasn't just a war, this was their extinction. The fall of Velronis Prime was not just a battle, it was a death sentence. The Dominion had spent centuries believing in its invincibility, but now the heart of its war machine lay in flames. Shipyards that had once churned out fleets by the thousands were reduced to molten wreckage. Supply depots exploded in chains of fire, and orbital defense platforms crumbled before they could even mount a proper defense. For the first time in its history, the Dominion faced something it had never even considered possible. A superior enemy. From orbit, Captain Elias Graves watched as the once mighty planet burned. Coalition warships moved in precise formations, eradicating any resistance that remained. The Dominion garrison had collapsed within hours. Their leaders had either fled, surrendered, or died screaming. The battle had been won. But the war wasn't over. On the bridge of the UES Retribution, Graves stood before the holographic display, watching the Dominion's strategic collapse unfold. His officers exchanged grim looks as the latest intelligence reports scrolled across the screen. Admiral Varric spoke first. The Dominion is withdrawing forces from the outer territories. Their commanders are trying to consolidate power around their core worlds. Graves nodded. They're desperate. The Garshok general let out a low growl of satisfaction. They should be. This empire is dying, and they know it. Varric's feathers ruffled. And that's what makes them dangerous. The Dominion will not surrender, Captain. They will fight until their last breath. Graves exhaled. Then we take that breath away. He turned toward the fleet command table, bringing up a new target. One even bigger than Velronis Prime. Prime World, the Dominion's throne world, the very heart of their empire. Silence filled the bridge. The idea was madness. No species had ever attempted a direct assault on Prime World. It was the untouchable seat of Dominion rule. But then again, the Dominion had thought Velronis Prime was untouchable too. A slow, knowing grin spread across Graves's face. We finish this. We end them. Varric took a deep breath, then nodded. We've come this far. Let's kill the beast. Across the fleet, orders were given. Weapons were primed. Ships were readied for the final war. The Coalition wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for total victory. And soon, the Dominion would learn one final, terrible truth. Humanity doesn't start wars. It finishes them. The Dominion had always believed itself to be eternal. It had survived insurrections, crushed entire species, and rewritten the history of the stars to place itself at the center of all things. But as its fleets crumbled, as its mighty war machine failed, as its enemies closed in, the truth became undeniable. The Dominion was dying, and humanity was coming to deliver the final blow. The largest armada in galactic history gathered at the edge of Dominion space. Human warships, brutal, angular, built for war, moved alongside Coalition vessels of every shape and size. Old rivalries were forgotten. Old wounds ignored. Every species that had suffered beneath the Dominion's rule now stood as one. At the heart of the fleet, leading the charge, was the UES Retribution. On its bridge, Captain Elias Graves studied the final target. Prime World, the Dominion's capital, the beating heart of their empire. Varric stood beside him, eyes locked on the tactical display. Scans show massive fleet formations around the planet. Their defenses are at full strength. Graves nodded. They know we're coming. The Garshok general let out a deep, guttural laugh. Good. Let them prepare. It won't save them. A comms officer turned from her station. Incoming transmission from Prime World. Graves smirked. Put it through. The screen flickered to life. Supreme Chancellor Orvax appeared, his golden scales dimmed by stress, his once proud posture slouched with exhaustion. But his hatred was still there. You think you have won, human? Orvax hissed. You think this pathetic rebellion will last? Graves folded his arms. I think your empire is dead. You just haven't accepted it yet. Orvax's pupils contracted to slits. The Dominion will never fall. We will burn every star before we surrender. Graves nodded. Yeah, that's what I thought you'd say. He cut the transmission. Then, to his crew, he gave a single order. All ships, advance. The Battle of Prime World began with fire. The Dominion's last fleet threw everything they had into the fight. Massive dreadnoughts rained plasma from the skies. Their best warriors, their most ruthless commanders, their entire remaining strength poured into the void. But they weren't fighting desperate rebels anymore. They were fighting humanity. And humanity had come to finish the war. The Retribution led the charge, its railguns tearing through Dominion warships like they were paper. Coalition strike teams punched through planetary defenses, landing on Prime World itself. One by one, the Dominion's last strongholds fell, until at last there was only one place left. The Imperial Citadel, the very seat of Dominion power. The halls of the Citadel shook with the sound of approaching footsteps. Orvax stood at the center of the chamber, surrounded by his remaining guards. He gripped the ceremonial blade at his hip, his mind racing. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. The doors burst open, and through them stepped humans, not diplomats, not rebels, soldiers. At the front of them, his weapon raised, was Elias Graves. For a long moment, the two leaders stared at each other. Then Graves spoke. The war is over. Orvax bared his fangs. Never! He lunged. Graves didn't hesitate. One shot. The Supreme Chancellor of the Dominion collapsed, the last ruler of a dying empire, falling to a single bullet. The final symbol of Dominion power lay dead at humanity's feet. Across the stars, the news spread faster than light. The Dominion had fallen. A species that had once ruled without question had been broken. Not by some ancient prophecy, not by fate, by humanity. The war was over. But the legend of humanity's arrival had only just begun.